Right, okay everyone, we'll get started with our final session this afternoon. So we've got Grant King, lecturer in mental health nursing at the University of Dundee. And as you can see, he's talking about arts and humanities in nurse education.
Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon everybody. It's never easy to be the last person on the programme, more or less, for the day. So I hope that I can make the fact you're staying for a slightly later train worthwhile. So I'm going to talk today about arts and humanities in nurse education. What I'm going to talk about for the next half an hour or so is around the evidence base for using art and using literature in nurse education. And I'm going to demonstrate at Dundee how we've had a number of different projects in which we've utilised different forms of the arts and aspects of humanities to improve the education experience and create some products. But I thought it was interesting to start with the idea, when you hear the word art and you hear the word nursing, you hear them together quite a lot. And I wanted to explore the idea of the phrase, the art and science of nursing, the art of nursing that we here talked about. And so looking at Peplo's seminal work back in the late 80s, where she talked about this idea of nursing as an art form. And I guess that's a reflection of the day in which we have this sometimes tension between the idea of the professionalism and science of nursing versus the care, compassion and vocational aspects of nursing, which can be regarded as the art form. And Peplo made some comparisons to the idea of the visual arts, the performed arts, and encapsulated nursing as this idea of a helping art. And if you look at the next two bullet points, this was the kind of context that Peplo spoke about. The idea that the arts are there to bring, as is quoted there, favourable changes in people. And ultimately, I guess, when we think about nursing in almost every context, perhaps except from a kind of a palliative context, it's all about making favourable changes in it. And the question is, how do we do that? And Peplo then talked about this idea of three words which we often more commonly associate with art: the medium, the process and the product. So familiar with the ideas of what mediums do we use in art, familiar with the ideas that there are different processes in art, and that art ultimately will have some kind of product. And when you tie that together with the idea of nursing, what you find is that Peplo, when talking about the medium, the nurse as the medium, that's the activity or the point in which it occurs. It's actually really talking about the therapeutic use of self. So the nurse as the medium, the place in which the art begins to happen by virtue of the therapeutic use of self. Then moving on to the idea of the nurse as the process, connects very deeply with the idea of therapeutic interaction and the process that occurs in art and this productive exchange, and also between nurse and those receiving the nursing care. And finally, the product is around the therapeutic outcome from working with people in any form of distress. So we have this kind of underpinning language of art in nursing as an art form, and that the nurse themselves plays different forms of an agent within the process of art. What we wanted to look at was around the evidence base for using what might be considered less traditional educative experiences in engendering the growth of commitment, compassion, curiosity and other nursing values and qualities. So we can see there from Brown in 2008, it talks about this idea of the knowing and the idea around Carper's levels of knowing, that not all that we can understand can be seen. In fact, I think what's the old saying goes, you can't measure everything that matters, not everything that matters can be measured. And this idea then that art, through a very specific guided experience, can help us know and understand things in ways which simply talking and listening might not be able to. And I'm going to give you a wee experiment to kind of test that with you. Casey's work in 2009 talks about a kind of similar idea that humanity and the capturing of the human experience won't necessarily be full and holistic by virtue of something like an assessment checklist, where we're looking for particular pieces of knowledge of a person's current health status, but actually the fluidity, as I said there, and the sensitivity that art brings, the subtleties, the subjective nature, the nuanced nature of art as an experience is a much closer replication of the human experience than simply languages. Some other pieces of evidence there we see from a friend of mine, Kirsten Jack, down in Manchester Metropolitan, who's a great evangelist around the use of arts in mental health as well. You can see there's a sense of development of self-awareness and emotional sensitivity from the use of art. Again, I'm going to come back to a wee experiment to show you if that works. Of the 3 projects that we used and looked at, and 2 were all of a visual art, one is of a film nature, one is of a comic nature that I'm going to talk about, and another was of art as a reflective tool. In some ways, all of those had input from people who use mental health services, and that includes nursing students, academics like myself, who all have lived experience, were part of the project, and we also engaged with third sector organisations as well. And we did that because the evidence is very clear that this idea of transformative learning occurs when exposed to the lived experience of people with mental health difficulties, where we're not simply increasing our knowledge bank, but actually engaging in these ideas of threshold concepts, where we learn an idea that changes us how we are forever, and we're unable to return to our previous state. And that exposure, empathy and compassion of working together with people, recognising both their challenges and difficulties, but also very much their strengths, helps in that transformative learning. And you'll see the journey there of self-examination to new insights, and finally attitudinal change, which we see in more positive person-centred behaviours in the workplace. And the final bit of evidence there from Free et al. Back in 2010 was around the intersection of science and art, and recognising that as we use humanities, literature, art within nursing curriculum, it moves us forward in having a much greater understanding of the wholeness of human experience, rather than simply the deficit model of the NHS, where we recognise people's difficulties. And self-promote for just a few minutes. I wrote a paper back in 2013 which was all around exploring ideas connected with this, which was the idea that assessment tools often become assessment weapons. We capture people's challenges, skills perhaps that they have lost, experiences that they used to enjoy that they don't enjoy, and we bring all of the loss and difficulty and capture it in one place and one time. And actually, if you and I were all to sit around and have someone say, what's the worst parts of your life, what are the things you've lost, what are the things you miss most, and capture that, and not ask the balance of what have you gained, what are your strengths, and that tool, much like an axe, which can be very helpful, becomes a weapon, much like an axe, which can be very difficult. So the idea of using arts and humanities is to give that whole human experience, and to recognise that people come with a breadth of experience that we can help them use in their own recovery journey. So here's a picture. I've got 3 children. I've got 2 teenagers and a toddler, and they all have tantrums that look very similar, except the older 2 are much larger, but they're a very similar experience. And it's not that uncommon. This isn't my little one, but it's not that uncommon for me to see a face like that greeting me, no pun intended, first thing in the morning. In fact, 5 o'clock this morning, because the clock's changed. Normally 6 o'clock, but it was 5 o'clock. Do you have any feelings when you look at that picture? Do you have a memory? Do you have an uncomfortable feeling? Can you almost hear the cry? Does it make you reflect on your own life? Experiences that you might have had, experiences that you might still have, that you might wish to have? If that's the case, then you've just had some kind of empathic experience. And Eric Kandel, who's a Nobel Prize winner a few years ago, talks about the idea that visual art in and of itself is an empathic experience. When we're presented with a visual image, what our mind tries to do is make sense of it based on our own frame of reference. So for everybody that looked at that and saw their own children, nieces, nephews, perhaps children that they've worked with, you've had a sense of empathy. You've connected with someone else's experience based on your own experience. And he was a great proponent of the idea that actually if we want to increase empathy in any kind of context, within a family context, within a workplace context, certainly within the care services, that actually having visual reminders of people's experiences was one of the most powerful ways to do that. So the first project I want to talk about is actually from 2016, so we've been going for a few years now, looking at different ways of inculcating the art into our programme. I want to talk about the lady who's in the top right-hand corner over there, and her name is, technically her name was Lorraine Nicholson. Lorraine's unfortunately dead now. And Lorraine was someone who I had a care-based relationship with. Prior to that, I had worked with her. She was a peer support worker. We've heard some talk about peer support today. She's a peer support worker, very well known in the Scottish Recovery Network movement, and also a student of art at Duncan and Jordanson, the Art College at the University of Dundee, where I work. And Lorraine and I got together and co-created a piece of work for our cohort of students from child, adult and mental health. So this straddled the three fields of nursing that we teach at Dundee. And what we did was we were trying to help students have a lived kind of journey of an experience of mental health. And what we did was we authored a blog for 10 weeks. And every week we had a different member of the fictitious family talk about some difficulties that were in their life. I wrote it and Lorraine edited it to make sure we had a kind of a coherent, a credible story of some kind of distress which mirrored the lecture content of that week. So if the students had had a lecture on loss, the theme of the blog that they read that week would be something around loss. And we'd go to a tutorial to discuss that. And what Lorraine did each week was generate a piece of art specific to the content of the blog. And you see some examples here. Sometimes it was photography, sometimes it was painting. And what we did was we went into the tutorials, had some questions for the students to reflect on around the theme of that week. As I say, an example might be a loss. And then we would give them each a piece of Lorraine's art and ask it to be used as a reflective tool. So for the students to sit with the art and actually answer the questions, I wonder what the person was thinking and feeling when they created this piece of work. And then we would discuss that as a group, check in with each other's reflections and feed that back to a larger group. So service user art as a reflective tool, really to engender compassion, empathy, curiosity. One of the reflections the student said there, to me this artwork shows someone seeking peace but struggling to find it because it's difficult to see past problems and worries to what is good in their life, even though they know the good is there. And so it was about getting examples each week of students being able to think in different ways and to wonder about people's lives and actually really try and ingrain the habit when meeting someone for the first time and every time thereafter, start in their own head with, I wonder what's going on for this person, I wonder how it feels to be them. And then the second line there is something taken from the module evaluation that stuck out to me. The module helped you expand your imagination to what really goes on in the real world, to the artwork was very inspirational. And I've bolded the word imagination because I think imagination is a key in mental health nursing. Yes, it's a key around creative thinking to solutions, but empathy comes from imagination. It comes from trying to capture and wonder how someone's life is, knowing that it's perhaps very different from yours, and making sensitive inquiries with the individual to show that you care, but to try and build that image. So that was our first project, service user art as a reflective tool. Lots of this is fairly little to see, but I'm sure we'll have the slides able to be shared with you. The second piece of work that I want to talk about briefly is the production of this piece of work, which is only being released on the 10th of October for World Mental Health Day. And so this is a comic that we have created. We're very lucky in Dundee because we have a centre for comic studies, and we have actually the only professor of comic studies in the whole world, actually. Dundee has a long history because of D.C. Thompson, the Beano and Desperate Dan and so forth. So Chris Murray's a friend of mine, he's a professor of comic studies. We met one day to see if we could find some way of working together around this growing medium, which is actually called graphic medicine. You'll see the hashtag there. I spend a lot of my time on Twitter arguing with everyone about why it's called graphic medicine and not graphic health. That's a whole other presentation. But graphic medicine is where you use cartoon format and comic format to communicate health topics. As you can see, it's very bright, it's very accessible, it's very low on need of literacy. What we wanted to do is we had a project, and these were 50 third-year mental health nursing students, and we had 4 goals. We were looking for a project where they could act in a leadership role prior to qualifying, which they did just a few months ago. We wanted to work in an interdisciplinary context. We wanted to look at some kind of advanced communication style, and particularly around health promotion. In one of these small panels here, this is my colleague Dr. Laura Finlay, who's a film and comic academic at Dundee as well, and she has a piece of work called Closure. And she explains a little bit about the use of comics here, and what she says is, comics can represent psychological and physical states in a way that is expressive and personal, but also decipherable through both a linguistic and visual code. And the comic scholars talk about the idea that comics are very economical, and in one panel you can communicate a tremendous amount of information. You can see what people are thinking and feeling in ways that you don't in other mediums. You can actually compress time within a panel and show a period of time passing that is much quicker in comic than elsewhere. So we decided that we would have a focus on suicide. I've got 5 copies which you're welcome to have. It's free on digital download. Obviously we want to minimise sort of use of paper, but I have got these and you can take one if you want, but I'll give you the link for the free download. If you follow me on Twitter, it's my pinned post on there. A lot of introduction about suicide, about why we use the comic format. And what we've got here are these are the 50 students that are named there. Some pictures that I know you can't quite see, but these are all the workshops in the Dundee Comic Creative Space, which is a comics workshop that we were able to use over 3 sessions. Students split into 4 groups, each generated a script of their own. One script, and I'm going to show you in its entirety, is around the experience of an adult acute inpatient unit where someone who's recently been admitted doesn't feel like they're being given the attention or connection that they require until a particular individual comes in at the end. And this was about the mental health nursing students trying to show what they wanted to be, that they wanted to be the person that always reached out. There's a second story which is all about a mental health nurse who has mental health difficulties and struggles with suicidal thoughts themselves. Third story is around a teenage girl, an adolescent girl who finds a parent dead from suicide and no one wants to talk about it with her, and there's a journey around that. And then the final story is about a young guy who looks to the outside world to be having a fantastic time, playing football, scoring goals, getting off with folk at parties, looks like he's having a great time, and the whole time you see the thought bubbles about what's really going on in the background, and one of his friends reaches out and has a conversation with him that ultimately saves his life. So they came up with the scripts, the stories themselves, and then myself and some of the comic academics who've been comicified. Now I'm a lifelong comic geek, so to actually see myself made into a comic character was really, it was a self-actualising moment. It was a real Maslow moment for me to see myself in that forum, and here's some of, but not all of the students there. So myself and the comic academics worked together to move the scripts and thumbnails into full stories, and then we had some artists work the stories up. So they're all incredibly short. For me, art is very much about the experience rather than the object, and it's about what it does with and for people, and it's about provoking a conversation. So this first story can seem quite critical of mental health nursing, and it's a story of someone's journey as they're admitted to hospital, and what you see is the nursing notes being completed reflecting the person's experience, which perhaps doesn't entirely measure up. We've heard some talk today around the Men in Nursing programme, and the University of Dundee is one of the key partners there. So we were deliberate in our activity to have the key character in the end who finally connects with Andy happens to be a man who's a nurse. So there was something about looking at kind of stereotypes, something about looking at redressing the idea that perhaps public services should reflect the public in which they serve, so we can identify hidden needs. So that's one of the 4 stories. The rest are in here. As I say, you can take them for yourself. We've obviously put helpline numbers on the back for people who are affected by those stories. So that was another experience we had of a different art forum, quite a novel art forum, but one that breaks down other barriers. As I said, English as a second language, other kinds of literacy concerns, because it's incredibly visually driven, it's perhaps a little bit more accessible and engaging. Particularly the story about the young guy and his friend having a conversation, trying to model the idea of young guys talking about their feelings and being able to approach each other about their feelings was important for us as well. So that was the second, and then the final project that wanted to talk about is our work with the archives that are held within the University of Dundee. So the University of Dundee is responsible for holding the archives for all of NHS Tayside. So we're very fortunate that we have the opportunity to be able to look at the real registers, records, photographs, particularly from some of the institutions, the Royal Dundee Lift Hospital, which doesn't exist anymore. It's also exclusive designer flats. It's just the thing you do with old hospitals, isn't it? We've had an opportunity to do that. So a picture there that you have is a class which I held. That's Caroline Brown, who you're going to see in a short video that I'm going to play in a moment. And she's the university archivist and happens to have a particular passion for mental health care. And we had a session where we ran a kind of workshop idea where we showed some pictures of the environment and treatments and contexts of people's lives from the asylum archives, and asked our students to recognise what things we are pleased and happy about that we've moved away from, certain types of practices, certain types of reasons for admission, to recognise the things actually we might have lost in modern healthcare compared to historical healthcare. And that was a really interesting exercise in which they were able to identify lots of things that we felt were improvements in the last 50, 100, 150 years of mental health care, identified some of the things which we perhaps had lost in terms of community and connection that perhaps some of these older hospitals had underneath, working together, more vocational activity. I live very close to Stratheden Hospital in North East Fife, which had its own piggery and had a community context where people worked together to provide a therapeutic environment. And we stopped them at that point, and then the last task we asked them to do was imagine being 40 years, 50 years in the future, and some of them would still be in their career path or at least off sick with stress, but still working. And think about looking back to now and imagine what would we be embarrassed about now when we look back in the future, what might it be? And I'm sure you could probably gather, I've been doing that session itself for a number of years, and the same themes come out, some diagnostic labels, the manner in which we use medication are the two key themes that come out. But it was about looking at the past to give ourselves a position to recognise that in the past we thought we did things right, and we can look back and see that we didn't. The same thing applies to the future, looking back to now. So it was important to look at the archives. Now we've got this video, and if technology is our friend, then we didn't have sound earlier.
We keep records, so we keep evidence of things that happened in the past. In terms of mental health nursing, I think that's quite important because you can see how mental health nursing has changed over the ages. And we keep the records because we want to use them, we want people to be able to access them. And we use them in learning and teaching, and we also use them for public engagement activities. But people who worked in the mental health service or people who were cared for by the mental health service can also come and look at the records.
I think getting the opportunity to look at the archives just reignites that little spark of where the profession has come from and where it's developed to, and how we can use that as a catalyst to continue to develop it. Never rest on our laurels, always look to strive to develop and improve, but support and enable others at the same time to do that.
So I think you can learn from the past, both in terms of making sure that you don't make the mistakes that were made in the past, but also understanding some of the good things like the sense of community that we sometimes found in hospitals. Just the basic idea that the people that you're looking after are people and they have their own stories to tell.
We're the enablers, we're the ones that support people with tools and techniques. Fundamentally I'm a nurse, and some of the traditions that we need to uphold of compassion, of care, the sophisticated ability just to have a plethora with somebody that is actually treatment.
We found that people who come to look at the records, whether they're people who have received mental health care or people who have been nurses, social workers, have found a different way to think about what they're doing. So perhaps they've been inspired by somebody's stories, or perhaps they've recognised something in the past that helps them to think about what they're doing in a different way. And I think that really is the power of the archives that we hold, is that they really can change how people think about today and maybe the care that we take forward into the future.
We've got to continue to evolve and develop, and don't want to be looking back at 2018, 50, 60, 70 years down the line thinking, well, that wasn't so good. We want to be creating excellence today for our future nurses and attracting future nurses and professionals with the same values as well.
One of the things that I think is really important about archives is that they give you a set of memories, and those memories are part of what creates an identity for mental health service in Tayside, or for the people who are involved in that. And it's that sense of identity that I think binds us together as a community. And one of the things that I've found about working with mental health service users or staff with the archives and with nursing students is that they can really foster a sense of community. And by doing that, I think we have a really good chance of moving forward in a positive way.
So a very quick run through of 3 different projects, all with the theme of using art and or humanities in somehow exploring human connection, and that was the theme really about the 3 of them. Connection through empathy, connection through understanding, or connection across the lifespan and across history with the view of helping people enjoy life more, both mental health nurses, those who receive care, and all who are invested. And that final quote connects in actually with a few things that we've talked about today. Actually, certainly one of the quotes that Karen had: we miss more by not seeing than by not knowing. And it's about seeing beyond deficit, it's about seeing beyond diagnosis, and it's about seeing the wholeness of the human experience. And that's really the place for arts and humanities, where the distress can be expressed in a fulsome and engaging way. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. That was wonderful. Does anyone have any questions they want to start off with?
Or do you want to get the earlier train?
Down here, yep.
Just an observation. I really enjoyed that. It was really good, and I suppose it's more of a reflection that when I went into nursing in the early 90s, it was probably at the arts that drew me into nursing, because of my love of literature and reading stories about people. And then I quickly learned that mental health nursing wasn't really about the arts and humanities. And then I guess as I've got older and more confident, it's come back to me, and the things for me that are highlights in my career probably were the arts and humanities were involved in. I know I touched on it this morning when I talked about social media and learning from history. But I think that is a modern way that we can stay connected to the arts, because a lot of what keeps me connected to mental health nursing is in the conversations I have online and getting to know people, the whole person, and hearing people's stories and kind of connecting with people in a neutral space where there isn't the same power dynamics as offline. So I think the comics was a brilliant example. I think social media is another good example of how we can do it. So thank you.
Great.
I agree. I mean, social media is our new journal.
Yeah.
For good and for ill, and unfortunately for ill sometimes, but it is our new shared history that we're creating together.
Were the students that you did it with bachelor's or postgrad students? I was a postgrad student and my previous degrees were in arts and humanities.
Okay.
And that interest was specifically why I chose mental health nursing over other forms. So I wonder if that was the same.
So at Dundee, what we offer in the pre-registration programme, not that I'm plugging because it's a bit late for you, of course, but we have, at the same time, people are on an ordinary degree, honours degree or master's degree pathway, all in 3 years, depending on what qualification you bring. So we suggest that our art portfolio, if it's not a unique selling point, it's a less common selling point. So people who already have an artistic degree, and we've got a number of those, can come onto the programme and do our master's pathway paid for pre-registration early. So yes, if you've got a particular interest in that field, that's definitely something that's helpful to bring. Certainly some of the people involved in the comic came from a kind of an arts background before nursing, and that was really useful. And what was really nice was lots of people that, when I first pitched that this was what they were doing, almost cried or were bored or life, but we were able to persuade actually over a period of time about why that kind of visual context can be such an emotional and powerful way to exchange information with each other. And it's a great reflective tool. Each panel, you can just sit and say, I wonder what's going on here. We can see a thought bubble as well as a speech bubble at the same time and have a conversation about dissonance between speech and thought. So you can use it in really kind of creative ways. And so we use it now in terms of things like recruitment, so taking that to high schools to talk about nursing as a career option, to talk about suicide, to talk about mental health in that format. One of the groups that we used as a kind of early draft test was a group of young people in Fife who were in a project for individuals who kind of had difficulty staying in full-time education. So lots of different ways of applying it.
Just a comment really grand on the way you're using the archives.
Yes.
And that idea, it just resonates with the way you might use things in therapy in relation to different time points. Absolutely. And bringing about change. And I really like how you're holding that idea of, but it's not black and white. There's not good and bad. There's a mix at every different time point.
Well, that was a learning experience for me, because actually for a few years I'd just been saying it was bad. And just doing this, what have we gained and moved on from? And it was actually Caroline, the archivist, who kind of quite humbly chastened me one day and said, we've lost things as well. And that evoked a different kind of conversation. And one of my kind of values is that humility is a really important part of professionalism. Phil Barker said professionalism and humility live at opposite ends of the street. And so there is something about actually it's good to kind of be wrong and know that you can be wrong about that. And the discussions afterwards with the students were much richer when we said, find what was good in the past, as well as move yourself to the future and look back what might be good and bad of now.
And how often those archives would just be thought of as a dusty, removed thing that doesn't connect with us.
There was one particular project, which was the Strathmartin project, and NHS Tayside had a very significant learning disability inpatient. So I'm the lead for learning disability at the university, had a very big learning disability inpatient experience. Inpatient wards and flats and all in one area, and essentially those have all been closed. And actually there was a great project where lots of the residents who now live in the community came to the archives and were able to sit and look at pictures of where they used to live, where they spent perhaps some of them most of their life, and that was a really powerful reconnecting experience for them, and generated so many happy memories that perhaps had not been lost or thought about for a long time, as well as more challenging memories.
And I just want to commend your work, and then I've got the right kind of other people could hear that too, so that's a good point. But I think there is something we definitely need to capture across Scotland and think about this together rather than in our separate institutions.
New standards are the perfect opportunity.
Absolutely.
To also say on the point of reflection and using media, in the current Mental Health Nursing Journal, which is the 70th anniversary edition, we've got an article that reflects on a couple of pieces of media. I think one of them is from an old black and white film about a mental health unit, and actually kind of students have reflected on the kind of the good bits and the bad bits that we've kept or lost since then. So again, as you would expect from me, a plug to be a member to get the amazing Mental Health Nursing Journal.
That's very good.
Read that unbelievably excellent article.
It's unbelievably excellent. Unbelievably.
Even more so, really.
That's excellent.
Fantastic.
So there's a few copies there, 5 of them. Be quick, help yourself.